You're listening to The Manning Report with your host, James David Manning. The news behind the headlines.
Brian Stelter yesterday on reliable sources on CNN, and I'll give him credit for that. And I don't usually pay very much attention to Brian Stelter, but I think he opened up yesterday with a piece I thought was very interesting, where he raised the question about the amount, the things that America is now allowing to take place in what used to be the shining city on a hill, according to Ronald Reagan, in terms of his classic democratic rule of law nation, is now just descended into absolutely. Actually, the reason why I'm going to let you listen to Brian Stelter, because I think it's very important that we understand something here, that the only reason why America has descended, this can only happen in a third world nation or in the period of the tribulation. And y'all ain't going to go tribulation. A lot of y'all, people don't want to go Bible, you don't want to go tribulation, but that's okay. You don't have to. You don't have to. Listen, if you're standing in the middle of an earthquake and the earthquake happens, you don't have to believe in earthquakes or not. You're going to go. But we're standing in the middle of an earthquake by Jesus called the tribulation. And that's why these things that are happening in tribulation, Trump is able to do what he's able to do to the bright, shining city on the hill, America. Mr. Engineer, and I find it fascinating the way he opened this up. And you may not like CNN, you may not like Brian Stelter either. I don't like him. But I think that he raised an interesting question in the ways in which I think is thought-provoking. And I'll come back with the answer to the question that he raised. Mr. Engineer, I think it's clip number 1, if you will, please.
Let me start with something a little different. Here's a mental exercise to apply to the news in the Trump age. What would you think if this were happening in some other country? Imagine how we'd cover the news if it were from Canada, Greece, New Zealand. Right now the news is about a president who spends time demonizing immigrants and spreading misinformation and accusing his opponents of treason. This week he threatened to close the border, then backtracked, and this is all considered just a normal day. He's well known for lying about policies and polls and minority politicians and sometimes even the weather. He grants special access to people who pay money to enter his private clubs. Especially this week, and in the wake of developments in Mar-a-Lago, experts say that's a national security risk. But the wheeling and dealing continues. Foreign governments and lobbyists know precisely how to spend money at his hotels to get noticed. Companies know too. They buy ads on TV and address the president directly. They work overtime to get people booked on his favorite TV shows, hoping to change his mind about key issues. Lawmakers do this too, and it's all just happening right out in the open. There's a widespread acceptance of the fact that he likes TV shows more than his intelligence briefings, but only shows that fawn over him. He attacks other sources of news, calling them enemies of the people. He has said this dozens and dozens of times. If you have questions about this, that's too bad. His spokeswoman has stopped holding the televised press conferences that had been a tradition for decades. We're lucky if they happen once a month now. This week, the president we're talking about said, "They say wind farm noise causes cancer," which is nonsense. But when one of his aides was asked about it, she didn't call it nonsense. This is what she said instead.
I really don't have information.
What do we say to American families that are concerned today that the president says wind turbines cause cancer?
I don't have information on that. If I get a readout, I'm happy to update you on that.
Still waiting for the readout. So what happened? Well, late night comedy shows made fun of the comment and then moved on. Oh, and about that, once in a while, this president says that comedians and news networks that criticize him could be investigated by the government. And his allies love to go further. They call for his political opponents, the other side, to be investigated, stripped of their powers, maybe even jailed. Now, many of these things we only know about because of aggressive news coverage. But at this point, some news outlets barely even take notice of the never-ending errors and gaffes and embarrassments. Look, maybe they don't have enough time. The other day, this president struggled to pronounce the word origins. He misspelled the word healthcare while promising better healthcare. More importantly, he doesn't have a plan to provide it. But his fans seem to buy whatever he says. They scoff at the news coverage about his scandals, or the fact that he and his associates are entangled in numerous investigations stretching from Manhattan to Los Angeles. Those fans blame a shadow government and media agitators for that. Meanwhile, he keeps holding theatrical rallies for his supporters, all part of a never-ending campaign that, in the words of one reporter, keeps getting angrier. At the same time, he's bemoaning real problems with immigration law, but he's casually saying things that are antithetical to democracy. Things like, we've got to get rid of judges.
To be honest with you have to get rid of judges.
And frankly, we should get rid of judges.
People mostly just shrug it off, like he's the guy at the end of the bar blowing off steam, or like he's an old man shaking his fist at a cloud. But how would this be covered if it were happening in a different country? What if all the U.S. reporters were peering in as foreign correspondents trying to cover Washington right now? What would they say?
The alleged president of the United States of America said wind farm noise causes cancer. I'm sure if you've driven out west or driven around America, you've seen these huge wind farm, wind mills that are wind farms. He said the noise, Tribulation Trump said the noise from these mechanisms cause cancer. Well, you know, I'm thinking that, okay, all right. If that's true, then everybody who has flown on a propeller airplane for any period of time, propeller airplanes also, if what Trump was saying was true, prop airplanes would also create cancer. Now, I'm not sure if you know what a jet turbine engine is. If you go back to the Wright brothers of the prop airplanes with a propeller, you got 2 propellers, 3 propellers, or 4 propellers, right? And they whirl the wind around so fast, and because of the slant of the propeller, it pulls the aircraft forward. And the faster the faster it flies, the faster it twirls, rather than it pulls air. Now, these jet turbine engines are a conglomeration of a bunch of little fans inside of a big, huge jet turbine that just sucks air in at jet speed and causes the jet to fly. So, essentially, if what Trump is saying is true, everybody who's ever been near an airport would have cancer. I mean, imagine this, that the president of the United States of America stands up and says that propellers, the noise from a propeller causes cancer. And he just moves right along. And Mitch McConnell, or members of the Judiciary Committee, judges that got appointed by him to the Supreme Court, just goes, he can say such things, not to mention a whole lot of things that Brian Stelter said there in that report. It's incredible. He says he's going to close down the border. The next day he says, I'm not going to close the border. I mean, I can't imagine, you know, some of the people I used to run with, that they allowed themselves to descend to such an idiocy. Wind farm, a noise can give you cancer? Oh, Lord, have mercy. This is a bit of a news blog we do, looking at spiritual wickedness in high places for the most part, making some observations about it and giving people a biblical foundation to the way of interpreting, rather than have Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham or Janine Pirro or Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow or Don Lemon, Rush Limbaugh interpret what's going on in the world. You come to me and I'll tell you based on what the Word of God says. They'll just give you their worldly, sinful view. But the Manning Report will tell you what God has said, whether to say yea or nay, whether to go or to stay. You'll be led by the word of Almighty God. Come to the Manning Report on a daily basis to interpret the spiritual wickedness in high places, because there's plenty of it that's going on. And so I'm the Lord's servant, James David Righteous Rebel Manning, and I'm here to serve you with news and information.